And this is kind of how car salesmen sleep at night. So I'm going to express a fairly unpopular automotive opinion here and say that I don't like the Lexus LFA. I know it's a wildly popular car, and a lot of very well-respected journalists have said it's the greatest thing that's ever been built. But to me, it's just a car that doesn't speak to me. I don't care for the styling. I mean, if somebody told me that this was the next generation of a Scion FRS, I'd say, yeah, that makes sense. It looks like a great $30,000 to $40,000 car. And I know people rave about the sound, but to me it sounds like an exceptionally well-built washing machine. And I know people say it's fast, but I mean, an Nissan GTR is fast, and it's another car that I don't really care for. I mean, the soul that I like in a car isn't necessarily manifest from a brand that is known for reliability and comfort. I mean, I understand that it's a great car, but the interior looks like it's all plastic, and I know that's exotic materials when you get up close, but again, it's just not a pretty car to me, impressive as a lot of the figures are. But I have gotten the chance to kind of put my money where my mouth is here, and because I was offered one in a deal that in retrospect, I guess financially, maybe I should have accepted, but it was when I'd bought the roof, immediately after I had bought the roof RT12S that I bought right at the beginning of 2016. And I had been trying for years to buy this car, and it had been sitting at Lamborghini Palm Beach for a very long time. So whenever I was down there, because I got family in the area, I'd go see the car and talk to the general manager and kind of keep an eye on how their lawsuit was progressing with it, and when it might or if it might ever become available. And obviously the way I ended up finding it was on Craigslist in New York, and I was able to buy the car. So when I was able to go down into Miami and buy it, I drove back north through Palm Beach to see some family, see some friends, and to drive by the dealership. And so it was always nice to see the guys that were there and learn what was going on in their market for Lamborghini and compare it to what I remembered from, you know, having worked at Lamborghini for a 6-year period that had ended just a few months prior. And so we would talk about different things. And when they saw that I drove up in the roof, they said, man, if you ever want to sell that thing, we have got your guy. He has been just going nuts over this car. And the car had sat there for about 3 years. So there had certainly been enough people who could come by. And if you knew what the car was, it was really, really cool. And so this guy had constantly been trying to buy it, and they had never had any interest. Just based on the lawsuit and the circumstance, they didn't want to sell it. And that was part of the reason why it became a lawsuit and such a big deal. But this guy had said, you know, if it can ever be bought, he wanted it. So I said, well, you know, I'm not necessarily looking to sell it, but I'm also the kind of guy that everything's always a little bit for sale. So if you want to pass along his number, I'll be happy to call him. So they did, and I shot him a text, said, hey, just so you know, these guys at Lambeau Palm Beach gave me your phone number and said that you were looking for the roof. And he immediately responds, just, yes, can you please call me? And so I'm like, not right now, I'm kind of driving around, I'll be all right, but I'll call you in a few days. So I did that. After I'd gotten home, I called him and I said, you know, hey, yeah, I bought it. I'd been working with some different people that were involved with the car, found a broker that was representing it for the previous owner, and he was obviously familiar with the fact that it had sat there in a lawsuit for so long and obviously knew everything about the condition because the car had been sitting outside for a good long while. So I talked to him a little bit and talked to him about his enthusiasm. He'd owned some other roof cars and had a whole nice collection of cars, but this was like one of those holy grail things for him. And I mean, I can understand, you know, it's not one of those things you could just go out and buy another one of. And on paper, it's the greatest thing ever. I mean, 730 horsepower, 225 miles an hour, all these unique features like the integrated roll cage and hydraulic suspension and everything that made it really cool at a time where 997 generation Porsches were just continuing to go nuts. So it was a great car to own, and I was really excited to own it. I mean, on paper, it was everything I ever wanted. And I had driven it home from Florida and was driving around Atlanta and kind of planning a few things to do to it. So I was still very, very excited. Now, obviously, as I talked about, over time, I became a lot more underwhelmed by the car. It was just not reliable, not well put together, and certainly not well kept, which is certainly not the fault of roof, but just the way it was put together. I couldn't fit in it because of the seats, which were just kind of poorly chosen for the car, and a lot of other things like that that just made me a lot less excited to keep the car than I was when all this began. But this guy wanted it badly, and he kept asking me what I'd bought it for, but having paid $69,000 for this car that I wanted him to think was well beyond that, obviously I was a little bit cagey on the answers. And I think I said to him that, you know, as I was talking to the Lamborghini Palm Beach guys throughout the time of trying to buy the car, I knew that the guy had previously been offered $130 on trade against the Aventador that was coming in, but then the future GM didn't want to honor that, and that's where the lawsuit kind of grew out of. And so I tried to buy the car for around that, but couldn't. obviously with the implication that I had to pay more. Obviously, I ended up paying less. And this is kind of how car salesmen sleep at night. What I said was true. I had tried to buy it at 130 grand. I didn't end up having to pay that, but that truth wasn't as truthful as the truth. And that's how we do things. And so he was like, yeah, that would have been great if we could have bought it for 130. I said, yeah, but that didn't happen. And so I asked him kind of what he wanted to pay. And he said, well, you know, to be honest with you, what I'd really like to do is just trade you my Lexus LFA. And he had a black Lexus LFA, which is my least favorite color in any car. And it had a couple miles on it, but nothing crazy. And it had been driven, but I just had no interest. I said, yeah, no, I understand that people like this car. It's just not for me, and I don't really want it. He kind of leaned, no, I mean, they're going up in value. Everybody loves it. It's great. I love it. I just really want this roof. And I said, well, I understand that you want the roof more than your LFA. So do I. So we didn't make a deal. But he kept coming back to me over time, just kind of thinking, yeah, that's really what I'd like to do. I don't want to just write a check and add it to the collection. I want to sell the LFA. And they weren't selling that well at the time, but it was certainly worth more than what I ended up being able to sell the roof for. I sold it for 154 grand, and I'd assume at the same time I probably could have sold the LFA for 250. But he kind of stayed in touch and kept saying he was looking at other RT12s, RT12Ss, of which there's 6 or 7 cars in the US, so they're hard to find, and I don't believe he ever ended up buying one. But over the last couple of years, as I've mentioned that to several people, they've all been like, Ed, you are an idiot. It's the greatest car ever. You certainly should have done it, certainly financially, even if you don't like it, it would have been the greatest thing. But at the time, when I bought the roof, I was honestly concerned that it might make me not even like my Lamborghini, that it was just going to be such a great car. Certainly it was on paper, that it might just be the greatest thing that I've ever experienced, and it might be the only car I'd ever want to own, which is obviously a great thing, but I still wanted to love the others. Unfortunately, I continue to get to because I really didn't like it all that much. But I did end up eventually selling it for less than I thought it should have been, but certainly a very, very handsome profit, and I definitely appreciated that. But when I continued to tell that to a couple other people that were really big on LFAs, one of them said, oh, I know that car. It's a good thing you didn't do that. And I bet this is the guy that offered it to you. And he was correct. And he said, yeah, I heard that he was forging duplicate titles. So you probably never would have gotten a real title to the car. I said, wow. Well, sometimes having an unpopular opinion achieves a good outcome.